For 15 years, I thought I knew my best friend better than anyone, till I discovered the monster hiding behind his perfect smile. What I found destroyed everything we built, but saved innocent lives. My name is Alex, and I thought I knew my best friend better than anyone in the world, until the day I discovered the monster hiding behind his perfect smile. Marcus and I had been inseparable since we were 12 years old, meeting in 7th grade when his family moved to our small town of Riverside. I was the shy, bookish kid who got picked on for being too serious, and Marcus was the charismatic new student who seemed to light up every room he entered. When he chose me as his friend, it felt like winning the lottery. Marcus was everything. I wasn't. He was confident, charming, popular with girls, and had this magnetic personality that drew people to him like moths to a flame. He was also incredibly smart and ambitious, always talking about how we were going to conquer the world together when we grew up. He protected me from bullies, helped me come out of my shell, and made me feel like I mattered. By high school, we were known as the dynamic duo. I was the valedictorian, and Marcus was student body president. We got into the same college, roomed together for 4 years, and after graduation, we started a tech company together in Silicon Valley. Marcus handled the business side while I focused on development and engineering. Our friendship was the foundation of everything good in my life. We doubled it, went on vacations together, and planned to be each other's best man when we eventually got married. Marcus was like a brother to me, the one person in the world I trusted completely. Our company, Digital Horizon, took off faster than we'd ever imagined. Within 5 years, we had over 100 employees and were worth millions on paper. Marcus was the face of the company, charming investors, and landing major contracts, while I worked behind the scenes creating the technology that made it all possible. We were living the American dream, 2 kids from a small town who had made it big. In Silicon Valley, success changes people, and I started noticing subtle changes in Marcus around our 6th year in business. He became more secretive, more controlling about company finances, and increasingly paranoid about competitors trying to steal our ideas. He started working late more often, having private meetings that he didn't include me in, and making decisions about the company without consulting me first. When I confronted him about being left out of important business decisions, he brushed off my concerns. "Alex, you're the genius behind our technology," he would say with that winning smile. "Let me handle the business side. That's what I do best, remember?" I trusted him completely, so I didn't push the issue. I figured he was just trying to protect me from the boring aspects of running a company so I could focus on what I loved most, which was creating and innovating. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. But when you've known someone for 15 years and they've never given you a reason to doubt them, you don't question their motives. The first real sign something was seriously wrong came when Sarah entered our lives. Sarah Chen was a brilliant software engineer we hired to help with a major project for a government contract. She was beautiful, brilliant, and shared my passion for technology and innovation. We started dating after working together for a few months, and I was happier than I'd ever been. Sarah was everything I dreamed of in a partner, and Marcus seemed genuinely happy for us. He welcomed her into our tight-knit group, invited her to company events, and treated her like the sister he'd never had. But I started noticing that Sarah seemed uncomfortable around Marcus when they were alone. She would make excuses to avoid being in meetings with just him, and she seemed tense whenever he was around. When I asked her about it, she said she was just intimidated by his position in the company and didn't want to say the wrong thing. I accepted her explanation because it seemed reasonable, but something about her body language around him bothered me. The truth began to unravel on a Friday evening in October. I'd been working late on a critical software update when I realized I'd forgotten my laptop charger in Sarah's office. The building was mostly empty, so I used my key card to get into her floor. As I approached her office, I heard voices inside, and assumed she was working late too. But when I got closer, I realized one of the voices belonged to Marcus, and they weren't discussing work. "You can't keep avoiding me, Sarah," I heard Marcus say, his voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before. Cold, menacing, completely unlike the warm friend I'd known for 15 years. What we had was special, and you know it. "We didn't have anything, Marcus," Sarah replied, and I could hear the fear in her voice. "You assaulted me." What you did was rape, and we both know it. The world stopped. I pressed myself against the wall outside her office, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. This couldn't be real. Marcus, my best friend, my business partner, the man I'd trusted with everything, couldn't be a rapist. There had to be some misunderstanding. That's a very serious accusation, Sarah, Marcus continued, his voice now openly threatening, especially from someone whose visa status depends on her continued employment with this company. It would be a shame if there were suddenly budget cuts that required us to let you go. Are you threatening me? Sarah asked. I'm just pointing out the reality of your situation, Marcus replied. You're here on a work visa that we sponsor. Without this job, you'd have to leave the country within 30 days. And who would hire? Someone with a reputation for making false accusations against her employers. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just sexual assault, it was blackmail and immigration fraud. The man I'd called my best friend for 15 years was a predator who was using his position of power to silence his victim. I could go to the police, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. You could, Marcus agreed, but it would be your word against mine. I'm a respected businessman with no criminal record and dozens of character witnesses. You're a foreign national who some people might say was trying to use false accusations to secure her place in this country. Who do you think they'll believe? I heard Sarah start to cry, and that sound broke something inside me. This woman I loved was being terrorized by the person I'd trusted most in the world. And she'd been carrying this burden alone while trying to maintain a professional relationship with her attacker. Think very carefully about your next step, Sarah, Marcus said. Your entire future in this country depends on keeping our little misunderstanding between us. I'd hate to see you throw away everything you've worked for over a momentary lapse. In judgment, I heard his footsteps approaching the door and quickly ducked into a nearby bathroom. A few minutes later, Marcus walked past whistling cheerfully, the same tune he'd been humming since college. The casual nature of his mood after what I'd just witnessed was almost more disturbing than the threats themselves. I waited until I was sure he was gone, then went to Sarah's office. She was sitting at her desk with her head in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. When she looked up and saw me, the terror in her eyes was unmistakable. Alex, she said, quickly wiping her tears. I didn't know you were still here. Sarah, I said gently, closing the door behind me. I heard what just happened. The color drained from her face. How much did you hear? Enough, I said, sitting down across from her. Enough to know that Marcus assaulted you and is now blackmailing. You two, keep quiet about it. She broke down completely then, and through her tears, she told me everything. Marcus had raped her 3 months earlier during a company retreat. She'd been working late in her hotel room when he'd shown up drunk, claiming he needed to discuss the project. When she tried to refuse him entry, he'd forced his way in and assaulted her. Afterward, he'd acted like nothing happened, but he'd been subtly threatening her job security ever since. I didn't know what to do, she sobbed.
Nice.
I'm here alone. My family is back in Taiwan, and my visa depends on this job. If I lose my position here, I lose everything. I'll have to go back home in shame, and my family will never understand why I threw away this opportunity. This isn't your fault, I told her, holding her hands. None of this is your fault. Marcus is a predator, and he's been using his power to silence you. But who would believe me over him, she asked. He's right about that. He's respected in the industry. He's charming. He has no criminal record. I'm just a foreign employee who could be seen as trying to manipulate the situation. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept thinking about all the times over the years when Marcus had made comments about women that I'd dismissed as harmless. His jokes about taking what you want and not taking no for an answer that I'd attributed to his confidence and charisma. I remembered women at parties who had seemed uncomfortable around him. Friends of friends who had made excuses to avoid him, colleagues who had seemed tense in his presence. How many other women had he hurt? How many other victims were out there? Too afraid to speak up because of his position and influence? I realized I had to make a choice. I could pretend I'd never heard the conversation and try to maintain the friendship that had been the cornerstone of my adult life. Or I could do the right thing and support Sarah, even if it meant destroying everything Marcus and I had built together. The decision should have been easy, But 15 years of friendship and shared history made it one of the most difficult choices I'd ever faced. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to Marcus's behavior and doing some discreet investigating. I looked into our company's hiring and firing patterns and discovered that we had an unusually high turnover rate among young female employees. I reached out to some of these former employees under the guise of networking, and what I learned made me sick. 3 different women told me about inappropriate advances from Marcus. 2 had been fired shortly after rejecting him officially for performance issues that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Another had quit abruptly after what she described as ongoing harassment that HR had failed to address properly. I realized that Sarah wasn't Marcus's first victim. She was just the latest in a pattern of predatory behavior that had been going on for years. He'd been using our company as his personal hunting ground, targeting vulnerable employees who couldn't fight back without risking their careers. The thought that I'd been unknowingly complicit in his crimes by building the business that gave him this power was overwhelming. I decided to confront Marcus directly. I arranged to meet him at his apartment on a Saturday evening, telling him I wanted to discuss some company business privately. When he opened the door with his usual friendly smile, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. "Alex, come in, he said, gesturing me toward his expensive leather couch. "Want a drink?" "I just opened a bottle of that whiskey we brought back from Scotland last year." "No thanks," I said, remaining standing. "I need to talk to you about Sarah." His expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of something cold in his eyes. "What about Sarah? Is there a problem with her work?" "You know exactly what the problem is, Marcus," I said. "I heard you threatening her in her office last Friday." For a moment, his mask slipped completely, and I saw something in his face that I'd never seen before. Not just anger, but calculation. He was already figuring out how to handle this new threat to his carefully constructed image. "Alex, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice taking on the smooth, reasonable tone he used with difficult clients. "Sarah and I had a business conversation that got a little heated. You know how stressful these government contracts can be? Cut the bullshit, Marcus," I said. "I heard you admit to raping her, heard you threaten her job, and her visa status, to keep her quiet. I know what you are." His facade crumbled then, and for the first time in 15 years, I saw Marcus without his charming mask. What was underneath was cold, calculating, and utterly without empathy. "You don't know anything," he said quietly. "You've always been naive, Alex. You see the world the way you want it to be, not the way it actually is." "The way it actually is?" I asked. "You mean a world where you can rape women and blackmail them into silence?" He laughed, and the sound was nothing like the warm laughter I'd known for so many years. "You think this is about sex? This is about power. This is about taking what you want when you want it, something you've never understood because you're too weak to take anything. How many others have there been?" I asked. "How many women have you assaulted?" "Does it matter?" he replied with a shrug. "They all had a choice. They could have said no and dealt with the consequences. They chose to stay quiet because their careers were more important to them than their principles." The casual way he dismissed his victim's trauma was breathtaking. This wasn't someone who had made a terrible mistake or lost control in a moment of weakness. This was a predator who had been systematically abusing his power for years, and he felt no remorse whatsoever about it. "I'm going to the police. I told them Sarah's going to press charges, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." Marcus studied me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating his options. "That would be a mistake, Alex," he said finally. "A very costly mistake." "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality check," he replied. "Do you know who really owns the majority stake in our company?" "Me. Those contracts you've been so proud of, those patents you think belong to both of us, they're all in my name. You've been working for me for the past 6 years, not with me." I felt like he'd punch me in the stomach. "That's impossible. We started this company together. We're equal partners." "Check the paperwork, Alex," he said with a cold smile. "While you've been focused on your precious technology, I've been restructuring our business arrangements. You own 12% of Digital Horizon. I own 88%. If you try to destroy me, you'll destroy yourself in the process." He pulled out a folder from his desk and threw it on the coffee table. Inside were legal documents showing exactly what he'd described. Somehow, over the years, he'd been manipulating our business structure to consolidate power in his hands, while I'd been obliviously focused on the technical side of our operations. I asked, staring at the documents in disbelief. How did you do this without me knowing? You signed everything I put in front of you, he said. Corporate restructuring, tax optimization, investor agreements. You trusted me to handle the business side, remember? You never read the fine print because you trusted your best friend. I realized then that Marcus had been playing a long game for years. While I'd thought we were building something together as equal partners, he'd been systematically stealing the company from me, preparing for the day when he might need leverage to protect himself from exposure. Here's what's going to happen, he continued. You're going to convince Sarah that pressing charges would be a mistake. You're going to help her understand that making accusations against me would not only destroy her career, but yours as well. And then you're going to keep your mouth shut and continue being my brilliant but naive business partner. And if I refuse, I asked, then I'll fire you, sue you for breach of contract, and make sure you never work in tech again, he said. I'll claim you've been stealing company secrets to start a competing business. I'll destroy your reputation so completely that no one will hire you to design websites for small businesses, let alone work on government contracts. I stared at this man who had been my closest friend for 15 years, who had been the best man at my wedding, who I'd trusted with every secret and dream I'd ever had. He'd been systematically planning for this moment, preparing to destroy me if I ever discovered his true nature. You've been planning this for years, I said, haven't you? I've been preparing for every contingency, he replied. That's what successful people do, Alex. They plan ahead. I left his apartment that night, knowing that my entire adult life had been built on a lie. The friendship I'd treasured, the business partnership I'd been so proud of, the success we'd achieved together, it had all been part of Marcus's long-term strategy to insulate himself from consequences. But I also knew that I couldn't let him continue to victimize women just to protect my own career and financial security. Sarah deserved justice, and his future victims deserved protection. Over the next week, I made a plan of my own. I couldn't go to the police without solid evidence, and I couldn't afford to lose everything in a legal battle that might not succeed. But I could document everything, gather evidence, find a way to expose Marcus that wouldn't be just his word against mine and Sarah's. I started by reaching out to the former female employees who had confided in me about Marcus's behavior. I convinced 3 of them to speak with me formally about their experiences, and I recorded their testimonies. I also began secretly copying company files that showed patterns of suspicious firings and hiring decisions that correlated with Marcus's predatory behavior. Most importantly, I reached out to a journalist friend who specialized in investigating corporate misconduct. Jennifer Walsh had won awards for her reporting on sexual harassment in Silicon Valley companies. And I trusted her to handle the story professionally and protect the victims' identities if they chose anonymity. The breakthrough came when one of the former employees, Lisa, told me that Marcus had actually assaulted her at a company party 2 years earlier, and she had proof. She'd been wearing a small recording device that evening because she was working on a legal case for another matter. She'd accidentally captured audio of Marcus forcing himself on her in a supply closet. She'd been too afraid to use the recording at the time because she thought no one would believe her and she needed the job, but she still had it. With Lisa's audio recording, Sarah's testimony, and the testimonies of the other women, Jennifer had enough evidence to publish a comprehensive expose on Marcus's pattern of sexual assault and corporate retaliation. We planned to publish the story on a Friday morning when it would get maximum attention and Marcus wouldn't have time to manipulate the news cycle over the weekend. The night before the story was scheduled to run, I called Marcus and told him that I needed to see him immediately about an urgent company matter. When he arrived at my apartment, I showed him a preview copy of Jennifer's article. Tomorrow morning, this story goes live, I told him. Every major news outlet is going to pick it up. Your victims are going on record with their names and faces, and the audio recording of you assaulting Lisa is going to be played on every cable news show in America. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions, from shock to anger to calculation. You son of a bitch, he said finally. You're destroying both of us. When this story breaks, Digital Horizon is finished. You'll lose everything too, I know, I said. But it's worth it to stop you from hurting anyone else. Those women were willing participants who changed their minds later, he said desperately. This is a hit job, and everyone will see through it. The audio recording says otherwise, I replied. So do the company documents showing how you systematically retaliated against women who rejected you. Marcus stared at the article for a long time, probably trying to figure out if there was any way to stop its publication or minimize the damage. Finally, he looked up at me with something approaching his old smile, but it was twisted and bitter. Now, you always were too idealistic for your own good, Alex, he said. You're throwing away everything we built for a bunch of women who couldn't handle the real world. I'm throwing away everything you stole while I wasn't paying attention, I corrected him. I'm making sure those women get the justice they deserve. He left my apartment that night without another word. The next morning, Jennifer's story broke simultaneously in the Washington Post, TechCrunch, and on CNN. Within hours, it was trending on social media, and by the end of the day, Marcus had been arrested on multiple charges of sexual assault and corporate fraud. The story was even bigger than I'd anticipated because Marcus had been such a prominent figure in Silicon Valley. The combination of sexual assault charges and corporate corruption made it a perfect storm of scandal that dominated the news cycle for weeks. Digital Horizon collapsed within a month, just as Marcus had predicted. Our government contracts were canceled, our investors pulled out, and our employees were laid off. I lost everything I'd worked for over the past 6 years, but I didn't regret it for a second. Sarah was granted asylum based on her status as a witness in a federal criminal case, which protected her from deportation while the legal proceedings continued. She eventually received a job offer from Google, partly because of the publicity surrounding her courageous decision to come forward against Marcus. The other victims also found new opportunities, supported by a tech industry that was finally starting to take sexual harassment seriously. Marcus was ultimately convicted on 4 counts of sexual assault and sentenced to 12 years in prison. The corporate fraud charges resulted in additional fines and restitution payments to the victims. His fall from respected businessmen too. Convicted felon was swift and complete, covered extensively by the same media outlets that had once celebrated his success. As for me, I spent a year rebuilding my reputation and my finances. I started freelance consulting while looking for a permanent position, and eventually landed a job at a nonprofit that develops technology solutions for social justice organizations. It pays less than what I made at Digital Horizon, but the work is meaningful and the environment is healthy. Sarah and I stayed together through all of this, and our relationship actually grew stronger under the pressure. We got married 2 years after Marcus went to prison, and she walked down the aisle, wearing a dress paid for with money from the civil settlement she'd received from Digital Horizon's bankruptcy proceedings. Jennifer Walsh won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigation into sexual harassment in Silicon Valley, using Marcus's story as the centerpiece of a broader examination of how powerful men in tech had been abusing their positions for years. Her reporting led to criminal charges against several other executives and ultimately contributed to long overdue changes in how the industry handles sexual misconduct. 5 years after Marcus was sentenced, I received an unexpected letter from him in prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten, which surprised me because Marcus had always prided himself on his technological sophistication. Alex, it began, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I've had a lot of time to think about what happened between us. I understand why you did what you did, even though it destroyed both our lives. You always were more principled than me. I want you to know that I don't blame you for my situation. I blame myself for not being smarter about covering my tracks. The women, the business manipulation, the threats, that was all just business to me. But losing your friendship, that was personal. You were the only real friend I ever had, and I threw that away for temporary power over people who didn't really matter. I know it's too late for forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand what I lost when I lost you. Hope you're happy, Alex. I hope you found something better than what we had. Marcus. I read the letter several times, trying to figure out how I felt about it. There was no real apology for his crimes, no acknowledgement of the trauma he'd caused his victims. Even in prison, facing the consequences of his actions. Marcus still saw his assaults as business and his victims as people who didn't really matter. But there was something in the letter that felt genuine about his regret over our friendship. Not remorse for what he'd done, but sadness about what he'd lost, in a strange way that made it worse. It meant that Marcus was capable of caring about someone, of valuing a relationship, of feeling loss when it was gone. He'd just chosen to reserve those human emotions for one person while treating everyone else as objects to be used and discarded. I never responded to the letter, and I never heard from him again. Sometimes I wonder if he learned anything meaningful from his time in prison, if he ever developed genuine empathy for his victims, if he ever understood the true magnitude of the harm he'd caused. But mostly, I try not to think about Marcus at all. Today, Sarah and I have 2 children, a daughter named Hope and a son named Justice. The names weren't chosen to make a statement about our experiences with Marcus, but because we wanted our children to grow up with values that would guide them toward making the right choices, even when those choices are difficult. We tell them age-appropriate versions of our story, about the importance of standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves, about how real friendship means supporting someone even when it costs you everything, about how doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. I think about the friendship I lost with Marcus sometimes, mourning not the man he turned out to be, but the man I thought he was for 15 years. That version of Marcus, the loyal friend who protected me from bullies and encouraged my dreams and celebrated my successes, that person never really existed. He was a carefully constructed facade, designed to hide a predator who was using me to build the platform for his crimes. But the loss still feels real, because the emotions I had for that fictional version of Marcus were genuine. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us deepest, not because they know us best, but because they've spent the most time learning how to manipulate us. Marcus used 15 years of friendship to lower my guard, to make me complicit in his crimes without my knowledge, to position himself so that exposing him would cost me everything I'd worked for. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was strategic. In the end, though, I learned something valuable about myself and about what real friendship means. A real friend doesn't ask you to be complicit in harming innocent people. A real friend doesn't manipulate you or lie to you or use your trust against you. A real friend doesn't make you choose between loyalty and morality, because a real friend would never put you in that position in the first place. Sarah understands this in a way that most people can't, because she lived through her own version of Marcus's manipulation. She knows what it's like to be threatened and gaslit by someone who presents themselves as trustworthy and successful and admirable. She knows what it's like to be afraid that no one will believe you when you try to tell the truth about someone everyone else respects. We built our marriage on a foundation of radical honesty, of supporting each other even when it's difficult, of believing each other, even when the truth is hard to accept. We promised each other that we would never have to choose between protecting ourselves and protecting each other, that we would face whatever challenges came our way as a team. It's a different kind of partnership than what I thought I had with Marcus, because it's based on genuine equality and mutual respect, rather than manipulation and hidden agendas. Looking back, I can see that losing Marcus's friendship was actually the best thing that ever happened to me, even though it was the most painful thing I'd ever experienced at the time. It forced me to examine what I really valued, what kind of person I wanted to be, what kind of relationships I wanted to have. It taught me the difference between loyalty and complicity, between friendship and enablement, between trust and naivety. Most importantly, it showed me that I was capable of doing the right thing even when it cost me everything, which gave me a sense of self-respect that no amount of business success could have provided. Sometimes the most devastating betrayal leads to the most important growth, not because the betrayal was good, but because surviving it shows you who you really are and what you're truly capable of. Marcus thought he was destroying me when he revealed how he'd manipulated our business, relationship, and stolen the company from under me. But actually, he was freeing me from a life built on lies and enabling me to build something authentic and meaningful. The man who I thought was my best friend turned out to be my greatest enemy, but defeating him turned out to be my greatest victory.